And welcome back to this Dialogue Web Extra. I'm Marcia Franklin. I'm here with Sam Hunter. He's an Idaho native and a very prolific and award-winning playwright. Thanks for taking the time to do this Web Extra. We didn't quite get to everything in the main show, and I wanted to ask you a little bit more about advice that you have for aspiring playwrights. In the body of the program, we talked about how part of it is just sitting down and writing, and maybe even writing 10 plays. What else would you say to somebody who's interested in pursuing the career that you have?
Well, I think that, writing plays is a very different way to go about writing than writing novels or writing poetry, and one of the big differences is that writing plays is really about community. A play is an unfinished product until you're in a rehearsal room working with actors, putting it on a stage, and then the audience comes in. It's that ephemeral experience of the play being acted out in front of the audience that is the final product. So really, I think you have to approach writing in the same way. You have to approach it for what it is. It's a community event. And so, the worst thing that you could do, I think, is just, even though I really think you should sit down and write these 10 plays, and it takes a lot of that solitary, time of thinking and working it out for yourself, the necessary next step is bringing it to a community. And there are writing groups, across the country, not just in New York, not just in major cities. There are playwrights everywhere that find venues for their work, and people to bounce ideas off of and to get feedback from. I think that other than writing 10 plays, the best piece of advice I could give you is don't be too precious about your writing. Be prepared to rewrite a play 10 times, and maybe that 10th draft isn't going to work. Maybe the play will never work. I have a play that I wrote in grad school that I workshopped, I think 12 or 13 times, and it was because they sort of recognized my ambition as a writer, and all these theaters across the country really wanted to invest in the play and me. But it was this play that was really young and kind of collapsed in on itself. But that experience of me getting feedback from all these different theaters and rewriting the play over and over and over, even though it wasn't about that one play, the experience has totally shaped the way that I interact with my own writing.
And that is different, isn't it, than writing a novel? Because even when you workshop a play or when you have actors read it, you're getting that feedback. It's interesting. And would you recommend that people, in order to write characters and to write dialogue, go out and listen, go to places and listen to language, go to new places and study characters? I think diversity of experience is such an important component, I think, for any writer. Because you need things to write about. For me personally, it's hard for me to sort of listen to dialogue in life and then try to recreate it. Sometimes I'll be inspired by this sort of way that somebody approaches language, or the way that they interact with people, and I'll sort of filter that into my plays in some way. But I think that first and foremost, your characters really need to sort of come from the ideas in the play. They need to come from you, the way that you approach the play and you approach the subject matter. Because the moment that you try to sort of shoehorn somebody that you might think is interesting in real life into a story, there's going to be a fundamental conflict between that character and the rest of the story. You talk about a diversity of experience. You've had the experience twice of going to the Palestinian territories and to work with a theater there. Tell me how that affected and inspired your writing, your thought process.
Well, I think first and foremost, just being in a country that is in constant conflict just really teaches you a lot about what it is, what's going on in 2011. What it is to be an American, what it is to be in a foreign country. So there's that. But I think that specifically with theater, it's a country where theater is dangerous. That to create a play is a political act, and on either side, really. And so that's sort of the stakes of writing plays and the sort of importance that plays have in the community were much different than what we place on them. It really sort of made me confront the sort of fundamental reasons that I approached playwriting, which is, what am I really doing? Why am I writing plays? Who's my audience? Because to write a play and to produce it in Hebron can result in violence. It really can, depending on the play. There were certain plays that they had to perform in secret because they knew that they would have caused riots. They would have,
cause violence just to perform a play. So I think that reminded me of the power of writing, and the power of words in a general sense.
And what were you doing there?
I was teaching playwriting workshops. I went there the first time in the summer of 2005. I taught a playwriting workshop in Ramallah. And I also started to do some work in Hebron with the theater there because they really wanted a playwriting instructor or somebody who knew had some ideas to offer about playwriting to come in and sort of offer it up to their company. Because it's also not a theater culture where people are playwrights and that's all that they do. It's an actor-driven, sort of group-driven process of creating a play. So there's very rarely like a singular writer. So they really just wanted somebody to come in and talk about basic concepts of Western dramaturgy.
Do you think you'll write about the Middle East more?
I have.
I know you've written about
past.
an Idahoan who was beheaded in Iraq,
right,
working there. But do you think those themes will continue to be in your work?
I think in an indirect way.
Okay.
When I came back from Palestine, I wrote a few plays, and this was in grad school. This was years ago. I wrote a couple plays that dealt with the conflict and countries at war in a direct way. And I found that, I really can't pretend to be an authority. I mean, I spent 2 summers there, and I mean, I know a lot of people there, and I spent some time there. But this is not something I can write about with any kind of authority. What I can write about is the experience of being in a place like that, having no relationship to it. And so I think that sort of like outsiderness or otherness filters into my plays in certain ways. And there's also, I have plays that are about people dealing with large political ideas and trying to reconcile them with, their lives. I have a play called 5 Genocides. It was in New York about a year and a half ago. That's about a man who was writing a book about 5 major genocides of the 20th century and could not reconcile what he was learning with his daily life. So I think that in that way it's really affected my writing in sort of a larger way, an indirect way.
You've seen danger too, because there was an explosion when you were there, right? You've seen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there were some. I mean, I think like, whenever you go to places like that, there's going to be some tense moments, and there definitely were.
Puts our lives here in perspective, probably.
Yeah.
You talk about how theater in those countries can be dangerous. Let's talk about theater in this country. Some would say it's endangered in another way, that it's kind of limping along. And, I know that Boise Contemporary Theater here, which does wonderful performances, a few years back had to cut one performance short just because of financial situation. Where do you see the landscape of especially regional or smaller theaters being, not like the big Broadways and all that performances?
Right.
What's happening? Is there excitement bubbling up, or are they just barely hanging on?
Well, I think I think both are true actually. I mean, I think that the most common thing that you hear about theater is that it's dying, and in a way it is. I mean, theaters are closing a lot, and I mean, especially in an economic recession, the arts are going to be the first to go. But I mean, if theater hasn't died yet, it's not going to die anytime soon. I mean, and I know that sounds like a glib response, but I mean, even in the worst possible of circumstances, people are still going to be telling one another stories. I mean, it's almost sort of the basest form of art making in a community, and I mean that is never going to go away. Maybe theaters will close and theaters will open, but it will all continue forward. I mean, more specifically, regional theaters are still going strong. They're having to cut back because, especially in the last few years, and they, like BCT had to do, they cut one of their shows from the season. But the audiences aren't going anywhere, and there will always be new audiences, and people are cynical about the theater, and people feel like theater's dying and that they have to fight. But in a way, like that's inspirational. I mean, it's better than being complacent, and sitting back and thinking like we can just make whatever plays we want. It forces us to really. The good part of it is it forces us to really think about what we're doing and who our audiences are, and how we're keeping those audiences. And what we're offering them, because we can't just rest on our laurels of being artists, and pretend like that label is good enough to earn us their attention. I mean, we have to fight for them, so that there's value in that fight.
Well, I want to thank you for talking with me today, both in the program and the Web Extra. Thank you very much. You've been listening to Sam Hunter. He's a native Idahoan and a playwright. I'm Marcia Franklin. Thank you for tuning in.